We probably speak less of being Muslim, but is it necessary to speak of being Muslim? We can do that by assimilating, becoming successful, becoming productive. We've managed to achieve that within my family. There often is a negative view about Pakistan. We openly promote Pakistan. We need to be inviting the non-Pakistanis into our homes, into our embassies, into our consulates, and speaking to them. The Western world requires, and the way in which they conduct business, it's very different to the way Pakistanis conduct business. But they're looking more for their own internal well-being, for the community's well-being. I'm looking for the greater good for Pakistan.
Thank you very much for joining me, Adam. Mr. Adam Sadiqzai is a hospitality entrepreneur, community leader here in Melbourne.
My absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me. It's quite an honour.
Adam, I'll start with how the origin story, so to speak. Your father migrated to Australia in the 50s.
Yes, correct.
And one of the very few, perhaps the first Pakistani in at least Victoria.
Absolutely. In Victoria, we know. There are some older families that were based in Perth that came prior to my father, but most certainly in Victoria. He was one of the first that we know of.
The hospitality work is kind of handed down to you as sort of a legacy, not just as Pakistan, but also your hospitality work. And I was reading your bio and I saw that your father opened the first restaurant, which at that time he called Indian restaurant.
He did.
Because Pakistan perhaps was not even understood or to be on the map at the time for Australians to understand. So what do you understand about that? Does it, what's your memory like? You say yourself you crawled up on the floor of the,
of restaurants
that your father set up. Yeah.
Look, I think he did come in 1950 as a student, which I still think today was a very brave move. But he had a vision. And I think falling into the hospitality industry was more of a necessity than anything. He was well educated and came from a good family, but seek to establish roots in the country, and he saw that opportunity in food. But of course, in those days, Pakistan was a new nation and not known to many people. What people were familiar with was India because of the British Raj and the Western influences and so on. So in my father and mother's wisdom, they decided to open the first Indian restaurant in Victoria, which went on to last for almost 40 plus years, which fed 6 boys and 2 girls and put us all through education, all very well. But he certainly set the grounds here for a new industry, which is now a very big industry here. So he was very much, my father and mother were very much pioneers in that area, in the hospitality industry. It was quite unique, quite challenging, I think, in those days. But I think in those days it was the British clients that kept the restaurant going and kept it busy, because of course there were a lot of British people in those days settling in the country as well. So that set him in good steadfast to create other business opportunities as he went along. He was very much an entrepreneur as well and had a lot of vision. So
you though stuck to the hospitality industry yourself, and not necessarily Indian or Pakistani food. In fact, very Australian, very
Western
food.
Yes, well, look, growing up in that industry, I saw opportunity outside of that industry. In the 80s, there was a rapid growth of Indian restaurants in Melbourne. And we operated at a very high level in terms of service and quality and so on. But the Indian food industry somewhat became known as one of the sort of lower or mid-range industries, which We were not
still perhaps more like your takeaway culture
still
than the
today.
fine dining.
Absolutely, and we were very much a fine dining venue. It was about quality and standards and service and so on. But after 40 years, I felt that we should move in a different direction, and I took over the helms and established a number of businesses throughout the country, not only in our own built, managed facilities, but in contracting to governments in running their facilities, sporting venues. At one stage, we were one of the largest operators within the sporting arena in terms of hospitality in the nation. So that obviously Indian or Pakistani food was not going to fit into. So from
far more mainstream.
Mainstream, yes, and that's where the opportunities were, and they still are today in the mainstream cuisine. So now our venues predominantly serve European-inspired food, which covers both Italian, French, Aussie type food, and there's little elements of our own food in all our menus as well. I'm hoping that one day I make our food mainstream as well.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think we still would, Melbourne could benefit from a fine dining Pakistani restaurant.
Oh, I think it most certainly could. We have beautiful food, and I have to say this, and it may not be politically correct, it's better than Indian food.
Absolutely. It's a very distinct food.
It is.
And Indian food is not really Indian food. It's like Indian food is also very varied.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's North Indian and Pakistani, which meet somewhere.
Yeah.
But in Pakistan too, our food tends to be different across different regions.
It is, but it perhaps
predominantly, yes, very delicate flavors, the layers, the cooking,
more traditional. Pakistani food. The Indian food has influences from the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch, throughout India.
So, Adam, you said yourself you moved more mainstream with your venues and your menu choices and who you catered to. Did the name Sadiqzai or did the name Khan, was it an obstacle at any point? Did it open doors or did it make you invisible? I mean, this is a challenge that immigrant community generally has, but you're a second generation immigrant.
We are, but I have to say most certainly it did. My father, in his wisdom, chose to bring us up in probably one of the most western suburbs you could find, Camberwell, which is an upper middle class suburb, predominantly western in those days. So we were quite different, both in name and in look. So that represented challenges, but we made our roots. We stood by who we are and our culture, and our home was full of our food and culture. And what my father would do back then was invite the neighbours in regularly to enjoy in the food and our culture, which worked very well for us. He had vision in that respect.
But this is more as an entrepreneur, breaking ground in Aussie society.
I think in the early days it did. In the most certainly in the 80s and 90s it did. Not so much today. Our name is.
So you're established now. So
we're established. We're established now. But in the early days, it did have its challenges. But Australia's come a long way. I mean, we mustn't forget Australia is relatively a young nation in itself. And although Melbourne is probably the multicultural centre of Australia, and they do it well, in those early days it was challenging. But today we are known, and just to give a short story, when 9/11 happened, and my company is Khan's Hospitality Services, I was approached by a local government member that suggested that I change the name of my company, and I asked why, and she had said that, well, the federal police will be watching people that. But I stuck to my guns and I still carry that name.
Entire sort of anti-immigration drive, so to speak, or sentiment, this seems to be on the rise, and numbers
It is.
support that. March for Australia, people saying, well, yes, at some point we needed immigration, but we no longer need as much immigration, it's too high, which means as an immigrant, it's how you look is going to be your calling card more than where you're actually from. So how does that make you feel in terms of mainstream politics of Australia?
Oh, look,
And as an immigrant, even if a second generation immigrant, how does that make you feel?
Look, it still impacts me 100%, and I'm more concerned about my children. When we have politicians here like Pauline Hanson making comments that there's none such thing as a good Muslim, I find that very disheartening. The nation's full of good Muslims, and overwhelming majority of good Muslims, and my family are a perfect example of that. It concerns me, but I don't think that represents mainstream Australian views. I think that is a reflection of the movement that's international at the moment, and hopefully that will pass. But I do get
Do you think
concerned.
it will?
I
Because
hope
it appears to be on the rise pretty much everywhere. And I mean, in terms of that may not be a concern that you face in terms of your immediate family or the next generations, but those who are still planning to come in for economic migration, they would now have another issue of being a target of a hate crime, not just every other glass ceiling that they might have to deal with.
Yeah, look, true, but I don't think it's as prolific as the media is reporting it to be. I think there's a certain drumming up of that here that's instilling fear in people. Australians, on the whole, welcoming people, and what we're hearing is the voices of a very vocal minority here. The majority are silent, but the one thing I have experienced in this country is that good prevails. There will come a point when the mainstream Australians will stand up and say, look, that's enough of this speak, so to say. So I hope that it does. I feel that it will. I think it'll pass when things settles. In terms of mass migration, there are conflicting research figures on that.
I mean, overall, the migration numbers have gone down, but of course, the idea, the kind of fear or the feeling that March for Australia has, or people who believe is too much, actually just believe a perception, which numbers don't support. But I mean, that's pretty much everywhere.
It is throughout the world. But it is about perception. It's not based on fact. And, when people scream here on social medias that they fear, Islamic law being brought into this nation, and I promptly point out that, there's less than 3% of the population in this nation that are Muslim. How on earth do you think 3% can change a legal system? Why would you think that of that 3%, all of them would like that? I believe that most people migrating here are seeking opportunity and a better life, and are prepared to assimilate.
There's also something very particular that has happened last year, and this year it's now being implemented, the Migration Amendment Act. That how do you interact with politics of it?
It is reminiscent of the White Australia policy, isn't it? I reflect on that. My father migrated here during the White Australia policy, and that was removed in my lifetime, which I still can't believe that in my lifetime there was a policy. It's almost reminiscent of that. But that being said, that passed and people moved on. And yes, it does represent a challenge being a Muslim in the business community here as well. We probably speak less of being Muslim, but is it necessary to speak of being Muslim? Is it necessary in that world? Islam is for me and my family.
Yeah.
don't preach it or shout it out. I have no need for it. But I stand firm and proud of my Islamic and cultural upbringing, which I'll continue to do so. And also understanding there's a very vibrant Muslim community here that are very successful, not just Pakistanis, Lebanese, Turkish, Albanians, that are very productive here and well entrenched in Australian society, that are productive and giving back to this society in good ways. And we forget, and there's not enough speaking of that. There's not enough promoting of that, of what we do. I know, speaking for myself, as a Muslim, I've donated, I would say, hundreds of thousands to non-Muslim religious
causes that are close to your heart as an Australian.
Churches and so on that do good work for our community and our society. And I'm just one. There's many of us out here that are doing the same. And it's conveniently forgotten or not spoken of. And I think that's just a reflection of media, where they like to push it at the moment. It's popular. The anti-Islamic sentiment is popular.
I think globally selling hate is easier, more palatable, sadly.
Sadly, it is. Just sadly, it is. And I certainly pray that we see an end to that at some point. And I think we can do that by assimilating, becoming successful, becoming productive. We've managed to achieve that within my family. All my children are productive in what they do. They're successful in what they do. And
what does Pakistan mean to average Australian people who are making decisions? Does it go beyond cricket, food?
I think, unfortunately, because of negative media coverage, there often is a negative view about Pakistan. And that's due to terrorism.
So Pakistan concerns them, not interests them?
No, I think there's also an interest. There's a sector that has immediate fear. But there's also a sector that wants to explore Pakistan. And, you mentioned before, with or without the title, it's irrelevant to me. I know that, speaking for myself and my family, we openly promote Pakistan. We always have, as a place for tourism and hospitality that cannot be beaten throughout the world. And people are longing, certainly within my peer group of friends and business community, and even my political friends have all, at one point, expressed the desire to visit Pakistan. So yes, there's opportunity for Pakistan to open and show itself. And I think we can do that better to the wider community. But yes, sadly, there is an element out there that has this negative viewpoint, which is unfair for Pakistan. I always state this with all the people I know, that Pakistan has had to face adversities like no other countries in the region, being surrounded by people that are generally aggressive and combative with Pakistan. So, for a new nation, they've done remarkably well, and they have so much to offer.
Tell me, in terms of trade, is there a new lane that should be explored between Pakistan and Australia? Business opportunities that can be explained as something that you've seen beyond what we already have as reasonably good connections between the two countries?
I mean, the common trade items here are clothing, fabric, linen. There's a certain amount of agriculture, metals, and so on. But for me, Pakistan is full of resources in the ground there. They just need investment there to extract that. And I think that if we can convince big companies, mining companies, to invest in Pakistan to extract that. That would bring extraordinary wealth to Pakistan and put it in a very good position. But we need to look for other opportunities within Pakistan. I mean, labour's still cheap, products are cheap, but they're competing, of course, with India and China. But I think Pakistan can do that better, given more training. I think Pakistan has to come a little way in understanding what the Western world requires and the way in which they conduct business. It's very different to the way Pakistanis conduct business. So we need perhaps to improve better on that front.
This brings me to the role of diaspora as well, and sort of the diplomatic presence that we have. Pakistan views, or as any country views its immigration population in other countries, as a soft power, ambassadors of the country. And, we've talked about Pakistan-Australia sort of perception relationship in terms of, how wide, wider view in Australia is of Pakistan. So as a member of the diaspora yourself, you think Islamabad is doing enough to utilize and organize the diaspora is that opportunity being fully utilized, or is there more areas?
I think there's far more areas. Look, in recent times, the embassies and the consulates have done a much better job of it than recent years. They're actively involved with the community here and inspiring them to promote Pakistan. But to me, that's selling a product that's already sold to a group of people. I think there's almost too much effort put in that area. We need to be inviting the non-Pakistanis into our homes, into our embassies, into our consulates, and speaking to them and promoting Pakistan better. I think we can do better on that front. All too often I'm in meetings and the room is full of Pakistanis, and I can't understand why we're putting so much energy into a group of people that are already sold on Pakistan. We don't have to sell it to them. They're proud Pakistanis.
You're essentially saying that the organizing the diaspora is kind of overdone and is there less requirement of doing that and more requirement of presenting a better picture of Pakistan to Aussies?
That's my view.
Interesting.
And I know that is a controversial view within the community, and they don't like to hear it. But
I'm sure, like every community, there will be issues or a beef to pick up with, the consulate or the embassy is not doing enough.
Look, what
blah blah. That's generally how diaspora feels.
But but they're looking more for their own internal well-being, for the community's well-being. I'm looking for the greater good for Pakistan. Here, there's so many different cultural groups. Organizations, multiples of them. I can't remember the figure, but it's enormous, that are all conflicting and not united.
The politics of it.
Politics of it that come into it. And it's not just the politics from Pakistan, it's the politics here.
Do you think in that sense, like how different groups exist of Pakistani diaspora here, are we different than other immigrants? Are Pakistanis somehow culturally different? Are you saying Indians are not like that?
Oh, I'm sure the Indians are like that.
Not like that.
I don't know whether they are to the extent of what we are. And look, I come from a different mindset again. I'm detached from that. The difference between me and the general communities, I'm born bred here. So I have perhaps a different sort of view. I've never seen Pakistan as a divided country of different cultural groups, whether it be Pathan, Punjabi, Sindhi. It's never occurred to me. I've always seen us as one. Yet here, there's a division amongst them. My father founded the very first Pakistani-Australian association here in the country back in the 60s, 70s. and that grew to be quite large, and it was very forward-thinking in those days. There were formal dinners, and they were predominantly non-Pakistanis attending those dinners and events. But today, that's all changed. Later on, we created other organisations because there would be a president that would refuse to leave.
That makes sense also from the country's perspective, in which you're more a joint kind of a diaspora than divided on ethnic or political lines.
But
it helps countries when you have a sort of a good soft power, joint soft power in another country.
look, I'm not sure whether it is the same in Pakistan as it is here. I just have this feeling that when people move to another country, there's this growth of pride to their particular background.
Look, to be honest, some kind of identity is certainly there, and that's very natural. I identify as a Pakistani woman from Punjab, a professional. There'll be many layers to my identity, which of course, I'm a Punjabi will come into that, and for a Pathan it'll come into that, and it's perfectly all right to have those layers to your identity.
Understood, 100%, and most certainly we should. I'm a proud Pathan.
Yeah, precisely.
But
So
I'm also
you're
a
saying
proud
in terms of
Pakistani.
your community objectives, perhaps that shouldn't be the
No, it
most
shouldn't be the
dominant
case.
thing.
Not in this country. Not in a foreign country. What is it to an Australian, whether you're Punjabi or Pathan? Like, it has no relevance to them. What has relevance is that you're a Pakistani.
Yeah, I guess that's a wonderful sentiment, and I think I'm not sure how many takers are that of that sentiment. Maybe in
There's
principle
not.
people believe that, but then
I'm telling you,
in
it's a
practice,
controversial one.
I'll ask you another thing, which shouldn't be controversial, but has somewhat become controversial. Speaking of the recent sort of visit of Australian Prime Minister Albanese, who went to a mosque on Eid Day, and the way he was treated over there. Then I can tell you my perspective. I feel that one can have policy differences and can have a very civilized engagement with a politician, with anyone, another human being for that matter. And you do not have to resort to shouting or treating. And I think it another layer, it's not just that I abhor the idea of a non-civic dialogue. I believe it should be a civilized dialogue on policy differences, but also the fact that as a Muslim, it bothered me, to no end, that a sitting prime minister or any guest, that he's a sitting prime minister is a huge thing. The office of prime minister is a huge thing. Walks into your house of worship as a guest and is treated like that. How did you look at it? I know that the community view that I've read has been very nuanced. How did that help? I mean, as a Pakistani, I was appalled.
As a Muslim, I was appalled. I agree with you. He is the Prime Minister of our nation. He took time to go to a mosque in an area that's generally viewed negatively amongst non-Muslims, wrongly, and he took the time to go there and sit in our house of worship. He should have been honoured as our Prime Minister and not confronted in the way he was.
Yeah.
And did it reflect well on the Muslim community? Not at all. It only made matters worse amongst those far-right believers. They say, look, here's our point proved. He's gone to an area that's predominantly Muslim, and that's how he's treated. Is this what we expect from all Muslims? But
how do you think people, Australians, have generally looked at that? I know Prime Minister himself said it was incredibly positive, that he did engage, etc., etc. But how's your average Australian looking at this treatment? This is,
not good. It's not good for Muslims. They don't view it as a good thing. It did not work well for us in any way, shape or form, and particularly after Bondi. We had 9/11, then we had Bondi. That reflected poorly on us. We had the shootings in New Zealand, which brought people together. There was a united front amongst Australians, non-Muslims, that stood side by side in solidarity and said this was bad. And that just goes back to my view that the overwhelming majority of Australians are good. It's just the silent majority at the moment. We just have a very loud minority that's winning the hearts of media.
Yeah, not in a negative sense. Yeah. Tell me now. I'll come back to the same question I started with. As a second generation Pakistani living in Australia, and first generation has its own challenges, and second generation, kind of face a particular tension. Whether or not your bond is as close to home and what is home, and if you've assimilated enough. So how do you navigate that? I know you speak of that. You very proudly wear that. Your children carry that. They feel that pull towards Pakistan. That's their dominant identity. Is that how do they see it?
Oh, look, it's in their blood. It's in their genetics. All of them. All my children.
They're third generation.
Yeah, they're
and
third.
Maltese and Pakistanis. Yeah,
they have European influence. My wife is of Maltese background that embraced Islam 40 years ago. So she naturally embraced our ways.
All your children have distinctly Pakistani names?
They do. And that was done quite intentionally. It gave them a link, a tie that would last generationally. Their children will say my father's name was Rahat or Himran or Zamina or Atia. That was quite intentional. Yes, it's been quite a natural thing for them, which we're very sort of grateful for. But that takes a bit of work as well.
It does.
So
I'm sure as it did with your generation as well.
Yeah, Dad worked very hard. We lost our mother very young, so it was on the shoulders of my father to bring us up in a Western society as one Muslims and being proud of our Pakistani Pathan heritage, which he did very successfully. And I'll always love and admire him for that, regardless of the challenges being brought up in a foreign country. And mind you, we had no relatives here in those days. We were alone. And there was no Pakistani community here growing up. It started to grow in the 70s, the community here. So he took it upon himself to make sure that it was instilled in us. And I know, he succeeded when my son, who lived in America for quite a while and who pursued quite a successful acting career, I was once
in Hollywood, no less.
In Hollywood, he was FaceTiming me, and I can see on the wall the Pakistani flag, which made me so proud that he still carries that badge with honor. What's their favorite food? Pakistani food. Which,
in fact, he was telling me, and I was touched by that. He said last time that when he was in LA, and he felt homesick. On certain days, he'd wear his shalwar kameez and wear his Pathan cap.
Yeah.
And that, he said, he'd walk around the streets wearing that because that made him feel at home.
It did. Often he'd be wearing his Pathani hat wherever he went to keep a link. My kids here today have no shame in it. They're proud to wear their cultural gear at any given opportunity, whether it's a community event. And it's very interesting because they don't have the same colour as me because of their European influences. So you see these non-Pakistani looking people,
terribly proud of being Pakistani.
Being terribly proud of it, particularly my wife, to now, most certainly after all these years, she's become quite well known within the community. She was the first within the Pakistani community to become a revert, to embrace Islam, and she found it very challenging in those days because.
We discussed that off camera. Yeah, that's unfortunate actually.
But today she can walk into the mosque and she's greeted with love and respect, and as a member of the community, and which she enjoys now.
Oh, that's just brilliant. I think that's particularly the reason why I wanted to talk to you, because it certainly interests me of how you carry Pakistan with you, and I've seen your children how they carry, and I think more power to you on that. And thank you very much for your time, Adam. This has been wonderful. I hope my viewers find it just as illuminating as I found it, and as interesting, because not only you, there are many like you in many countries around the world who are second generation, then raising the third generation, and how do they carry these multiple identities with them.
We can successfully do it.
Yes, inshallah.
And inshallah, my fear is that we lose our young ones, and they step aside from that heritage and religion.
I think it takes a lot of work.
It does. We just have to instill the love and the food, the culture into them at an early stage.
Identity, absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. This has been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for having me.